Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Gesso. You know it if you've been tuning in, but this podcast deals with topics related to psychedelic culture, medicine, or research with an ongoing curiosity about what it all means insofar as the psychedelic experience is a part of living the ordinary life of being human and alive. And given that a fundamental, unquestionable part of being alive is dying. That's what this episode deals with today. It is an interview with Andrea Bird. Andrea Bird is an accomplished Canadian artist specializing in a painting medium called encaustic, which uses beeswax hardened with damar resin and mixed with oil paint. She has also been an art teacher for decades, teaching at both the Elora Center for the Arts and at the school she and her husband created, which is called The Hive in the Alton Mill Art Center in Caledon. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2012 at 51 years of age. Almost 5 years later, having gone through all the recommended treatments, her cancer had come back, having spread to her lungs and her bones. In 2017, she received her terminal diagnosis. In December of 2018, having no experience with it up to this point, she received underground psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to grapple with the challenge of dying, inspired by Michael Pollan's most recent book, How to Change Your Mind. As we live in a death-phobic culture, she is wanting to begin and to continue the conversation about how we live, grieve, and die, and she is on the show for this episode to share her psilocybin story publicly for the first time. I've known Andrea since shortly after her first psilocybin journey, and the way she has shared what she learned and went through has been really inspiring for me, and I felt really called to help bring that learning to the rest of us, bring that learning into the world by showcasing her story here on Adventures Through the Mind. As you're listening to it, I mean, maybe you're like me and you tend to listen to your podcast at like 2x the speed because time is short and time is money and blah, blah, blah. But I invite you to listen to this one at regular speed and really sit with it. It deals with some difficult topics, obviously, dying. And I think there's value in giving yourself the space to be with what's shared in the manner in which it is shared organically, person to person, Andrea to all of us, and to give yourself the space to feel what arises when we're listening, as I think much of the value is not only in the words, but what the words awaken within us, not only in the concepts, but what the deeper, richer meaning of those concepts represent and how they land in our body when we hear them shared through story. So yeah, listen to this one not at 2x the speed if you normally do, and give yourself the space to be with what arises as you listen. Of course, this podcast is wonderfully supported by my patrons on Patreon. Thank you very, very much, especially in the times of the pandemic and everything getting all weird economically. You're sticking around, and I appreciate that very much. So extra thanks to the people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube or in the description to this episode, wherever you are finding it. Those people give significantly. If you are not yet a patron of the show and you would like to support the show financially, please do so by becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/JamesWGesso. You could also leave a one-time PayPal donation or buy something off the shop at jameswgesso.com. Links to all of that are contained in the description, so no need to memorize them in your head, but whatever financially you can offer to the show is appreciated very much. So thank you. Okay, so the preamble is done. Here's the amble. This is my interview with Andrea Bird here on Adventures Through the Mind. Well, let's get in if you feel ready.
Are you ready? How are you? Tell me how you are.
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. My emotional experience yesterday was kind of low. I mean, there's so much sort of embodied emotional energy in reality right now. So things that otherwise might be little blips become little blimps, you know? And
Yes, you add one more letter.
Yeah, they hover around me all day long and sort of like cast shade on my soul in some way or another.
Mm.
And yesterday was kind of one of those days, but I did really good with feeling bad. So I guess that plus a good sleep and a good sort of session with me in the words today has resulted in me feeling in a, like a reasonably kind of calm and centered place. I feel excited about this. I feel a complicated sense of excitement around this interview,
Hmm.
where I feel excitement because you're a wonderful person, and I feel like you have a lot of value to offer my listeners. Um, and also that excitement is sort of mixed. It's like tempered with this. It's not an exciting thing. Excitement usually is associated to a good feeling, and it's, the having you on the show is a good feeling. The context in which you've stepped into it, and the context in which our relationship has been forged, is definitely around something that is not a good feeling for me at all. So, which is, of course, you're dying. And then I also have, a little bit of nervousness. I want to do you well here.
Hmm.
I want to frame you. I want to frame you in a good way. So, I mean, that's kind of the energy I'm bringing to it. All of which sort of like maybe like coalescing with like a meta awareness of what this is all for, to bring me into a sort of like a centered place. And that's how I'm showing up. That's my readiness right now.
Okay. Yeah, I have the same kind of feeling, like excitement and sharing this experience, but a, it's all held by the fact that I'm dying, right?
Mm.
And that I wouldn't have probably even done the mushroom trip, if I wasn't dying. And although that seems crazy now, like why doesn't everyone just do them all the time? you know,
Right.
but not all the time, but yeah, and that's been weighing heavily on me. Did you get my email with the poem I sent
I
and
did, with
stuff?
the pupils. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Yeah. So that's the pupil that's hiding under her desks that's saying, nothing to see here. Don't pick me. Don't pick me. I might add that line to the poem. Don't pick me is very much on my mind because I've been neglecting her. I've been focusing on the one that is, yep, okay, I got this. I got this dying thing. I know how to do this. I'll dive in right into it. I'm teaching myself, learning as much as I can, reading as much as I can, educating myself. And then there's this whole other part of me equally, if not more even, that just doesn't want to die. It's just like, no, no, like just pick that person over there or something. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it implies if you don't pick me, someone else is going to have to be picked. But so I'm coming face to face with that right now. This huge part of me that wants to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that will come up in our conversation. It might. And how that will segue to the mushroom experience. There's many examples of that, like even in our last experience where we were in that darkness and I was in the saddest place I've ever been in my life. And then that little bubble of light, came up out of that primordial ooze of that darkness and like bubbled to the surface. And then it turned into such joy and, the recognition that life and death are not separate, and joy and despair are not separate, and wanting to live and also being open to dying are not separate. So I could see how those things could segue.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? Speaking of segue, I feel like we're in it now.
Okay,
So
yeah.
here we are. Andrea, why don't you give us a little bit more context here, specifically around, like, since very much this interview is sort of like the way we've envisioned it has something to do, or something about you telling your story, and the architecture of the story being the opportunity to share what it all means insofar as where psilocybin has landed in your journey of dying. And so maybe we'll start with the diagnosis as the beginning of this story. Obviously, that's not the beginning, really. I mean, at some point, possibly your conception, is the beginning. But well, maybe we'll start there, which was like the sort of like the psychological, emotional landscape that the diagnosis landed in, and where that brought you, and how it inevitably or eventually, excuse me, brought you to seeking out the mushrooms.
Okay. Well, the diagnosis of cancer came about 7.5 years ago, and it was a breast cancer that was a complete shock and surprise to me. And even though I had been someone who was curious and interested and fascinated by the subject of grief and dying ever since my father died over 30 years ago, there's something visceral that happens when your own life becomes the next one in line, that when you can actually begin to try to wrap your head around the idea that I'm going to die. It's a different thing than recognizing that everyone else is going to die. And so it's been an ongoing journey and unfolding for me since then. And in so many ways, in learning how to ask for help, in learning how to be vulnerable and dependent on the people that love me and that I love. And then there's a surfacing out of it, you get your treatment, and then you go out and live your life. As far as they're concerned, you're cancer free. But then 3 years ago, I found out that my cancer had spread to my lungs and my bones. And that was a different hurdle entirely. If the first one was challenging, but it's like a hill that starts out and then is difficult and challenging terrain on top of it for a while, and then it kind of just flattens out again, and relatively normal life goes on, but there is no going back to being pre-cancer. Then this stage 4 diagnosis was like a cliff, and I had no idea how to climb it. And I had to learn, the handholds, the way to measure myself, the way to pace myself up the side of this cliff face, because it felt like suddenly death was right here, not as even like with the first diagnosis, it was maybe here, and then it suddenly was like right in front of my face, and there was no avoiding it, no pretending that any semblance of normal life would resume. And so I had been reading the book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind, in which he went all over the world exploring various psychedelic plants with a guide, and it was fascinating to me. And so my husband Daniel said, is that something you would be interested in doing? We both read the part on psilocybin, and I said, absolutely. That sounds fascinating to me. And even though I've never done anything quite like this in my life, the fear that I had about doing it was overcome by the curiosity and the openness to maybe learning something that I didn't know. And then it became a process of finding out how I can do this and who could help me, who could guide me through it. And so since then, I've done 2 guided mushroom trips. And it has been truly one of the most powerful and helpful things that I've done in learning to scale that cliff face. It really continues even now to teach me. So this is in the last 2.5 years or so that I have had these 2 experiences. And they continue to unfold and teach me more and more. Like this, it's a very gentle teacher.
So Andrea, again, like I'm feeling aware that the series of questions that I'll have as you tell this story, or questions that ask you to step into very vulnerable places. And I'm aware and wanting to be cautious of that, but also, like yourself, not wanting to shy away from what's in the room, and that what's in the room being something that's vulnerable and tender and difficult. So that being said, what was happening for you psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, that led you to feel like, yeah, the mushrooms, that this is the right choice for me? So what was happening for you that made you think, yes, I need this, or yes, I want this? And in what was happening for you, what did you think the mushrooms would do for you?
I had no idea what they would do for me, honestly. I mean, even though I'd read about Michael's experience and I'd read other books about it, I had hopes of what they might do for me. I hoped that I would learn how to let go of whatever was unnecessary, whatever was inessential in my life. And by that I mean, lightening, kind of like unpacking, a big heavy suitcase that you've maybe been lugging around for decades, and taking some things out that are no longer needed for this part of the journey. And why did I think mushrooms would be helpful with that? I think it was going to, for me to even contemplate this, let alone do it, I had to be willing to, I felt like I had to have a lot of courage to do it. And that's not something that I would say about myself, that I'm a really courageous person. But the mushrooms kind of changed my perception of myself that way. And I'm able to say that a little more easily now. But just the mere fact of even doing them gave me like a confidence in myself that, okay, if I could do that, then maybe I can go through my dying time with some courage as well. I was afraid that I might, this fear now seems really ungrounded and like completely off the wall to me. But at the time, before the first experience, I was afraid that I would find something out about myself that I didn't even know about, or that I'd find some darkness in myself that I didn't know how to handle, or, because you hear about so-called bad trips and people being really freaked out about something that arises during their time. So there was just a little tiny remnant of that fear come the day that the mushroom experience was planned for. But the bigger part of me had a strong sense that these mushrooms would, at the very least, tell me something about myself that I didn't know, that would be helpful in the coming months or years or however long I had to live.
Mm-hmm. Again, I feel really sensitive to the fact that I'm asking vulnerable questions, and I'm still very curious about sort of the difficulties you were facing, because much of what comes of the mushroom experience is sort of like I don't know, it'll be up to your language to, shift this if I've got it incorrectly, but is about like opening up new ways of understanding what you're going through, reframing things, reframing the problems, reframing the challenges, reinvigorating your resources in ways. So, that said, then I'm wondering, to get a really like a deeper sense of what were the difficulties and the challenges you were facing emotionally around your dying, that the mushrooms seemed like they would be able to support you in?
That's a good question. I think that I can only speak from my own experience. When I was told that I had a terminal cancer diagnosis, which is different than the first time, when you hear of people that go on to live a relatively normal lifespan after chemo, radiation, and surgery, cancer does not recur. So I was thinking I was in that group for a while. And then when I shifted to this other group, it was, okay, my life is going to be considerably shorter than I ever imagined. So what is it that I want to do with this time that I have left? You know, what is most important to me? What is going to help me get through this, and who is going to help me get through this? Who are going to be my teachers? Who's further along the path than I am in this capacity that can help me? Because that has always been how I've kind of, I think, lived my life, is recognizing where I am and my growing edge. You know, like my capacity to be with this diagnosis was asking everything from me, everything, and then some. And I thought, okay, I need some help, you know, and I had gotten kind of comfortable with asking for help the first time around, kind of, you know, stepping into the realization that if I don't get this help, then it's, you know, then I won't be able to keep our art school open, or I won't be able to, you know, do so many things, you know, receive the beautiful food that people would bring to our homes, or, you know. But now I was in a place where I knew I was going to have to really strip away any sense of bravado, or that I can do this on my own, and recognize that I needed help from friends and family, from the mushrooms, from my guide, from, you know, poetry, from all of the things that would support me and carry me through this experience. And that's very humbling, you know, for me to be that vulnerable, to be that needy. You know, it's like even saying the word needy is, there's a line in a poem, you know, that, where it says, you know, the tree, it's about a tree waiting in the wintertime to get her branches back and her leaves back, and that this emptiness is giving her a new kind of beauty. And I can understand that intellectually, but to really understand that in my heart, that being needy and vulnerable and dependent and empty and waiting can be a beautiful thing. But that's not something that came easily to me. So I needed help getting there. And that is where I find myself now. And yet there's always another challenge in front of one, you know. So you get to one place like, okay, I got that. I understand how vulnerability can be beautiful and neediness can be beautiful. But then there's something else that arises that needs to be looked at and held as well. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there.
Well, you know, I feel like we're getting to a place here where we're sort of like, you're sort of like leaning into what was there before, and sort of leaning into where you are now, and leaning into what it offered you in this way that sort of feels like circumambulating the mushroom experiences or something. And you had mentioned that you know, that you were asking the mushroom to like help you let go of what is no longer needed. And I know when we first met through a mutual friend, and you started telling me about your journeys with the mushroom, you had talked about how, you know, before this there was a real sort of like, I gotta die the right way, like I like really like doing it. You were really like, I'm going to do this dying thing, and you were working really hard at it, and you were also very challenged by it. And so when you went into the mushroom experience, you had this sort of like, yes, you know, like what is no longer needed, I must shed and let it all go. And I please do correct me or expand on what I'm remembering. And that was sort of the energy that you were, along with everything you just said, that you were bringing to the mushroom experience, to your intention to say like, you know, help me let go of what is no longer needed. So sort of like jumping off that and, you know, expanding or correcting what needs to be corrected. What was basically, how did you enter into, and what was this first mushroom experience?
Um, well, how did I enter into it? So I found a trusted guide that would be able to be with me during it, so that if anything arose that was uncomfortable for me or too much for me, they would just, be there, and kind of would walk alongside me throughout the 3 hours that it takes. And it was a very, very conscious and deliberate and intentional, like conversation with them about, what is it you're hoping for? What is it you're afraid of? What is what beauty might arise? What fears might arise? What are you asking the mushrooms to teach you? And that kind of thing, including, talking to the mushrooms as I'm breaking them up to make the tea, and telling them to be both gentle with me, but also to not hold anything back. So there's this, kind of wanting to dive in, and also wanting to be able to manage whatever arose. So I really do recommend for anyone doing this that having somebody there to facilitate that, create the container to hold this experience, is very helpful. And not just any person, but somebody who knows about what they're doing. And I was both very excited about it and fearful, and excitement and fear kind of are similar things too, right? But the excitement definitely overrode the fear, and allowed me to go into this with confidence that this was absolutely the right thing. The way things fell into place, there's a synchronicity in life that happens. And I think when one gets to their dying time, which is what I've called the last 3 years, there's a trust in things that just sort of happen in a way that we might have been too busy. I might have been too busy to notice during my times when I was well and busy in my life. But suddenly those things become very apparent, and they're important to pay attention to. So I paid attention to how it all fell into place, and that there was a sense of this is meant to be. And I really trusted that. And I think the mushrooms have just caused me to trust that even more so since the experience, but even beforehand.
Mm. And, a mushroom experience is an incredibly vulnerable, very personal thing. So it's with that I ask, what is it that happened during that experience? And what did it offer you insofar as, the difficulties you were facing, whether you knew they were difficulties or not? And then what came of that experience afterwards?
Okay, that's a big answer. The experience was really nothing like what I had expected. I don't know what I had quite envisioned. So I'll set it up for you. So I'm in my own home. I'm wearing an eye, like kind of like an eye mask, but I can still open my eyes within it. So, and then it's just dark. So I didn't have to have my eyes closed the whole time. And I was listening to headphones to a psilocybin playlist, specifically chosen for that purpose. And my guide was there in case they were needed. Everything else had been cleared off so that there would be no distractions for me during this next 3 or 4 hours. And at first, my whole body started to just shake, or my legs started shaking. And so I held my own hand to just kind of calm myself down, just kind of a pulling myself together kind of feeling. It felt like I was just cold. And so then my left hand turned into my husband's hand. And I don't just mean like it felt like his hand. and I couldn't see it because I was wearing the blindfold. But in my mind's eye, it became my husband Daniel's hand, and he was just holding it the way he would hold it and comforting me. And I felt his presence so strongly, even though he wasn't there. And we've, been married for over 30 years. And I think I could feel his love. And that was really comforting going into the trip, because it calmed me right down, as if he was right there saying, everything's fine. You got this. You can do this. But it also made me really sad, because I imagined that I would be leaving him in the not too distant future. So I started to cry. But it was a really a happy kind of crying, because yes, I was sad that I would be leaving him, but I was also very grateful that I had had that love in my life, his love in my life all that time. And that he was going to help me get through this mushroom experience in the same way he's going to help me get through this dying time and my actual death. That just became really, really super clear in the phase one. So for people who haven't had this experience, I should describe it as having many peaks and, like, I wouldn't say valleys, but there are like places where things are happening, like my hand is turning into Dan's hand and I'm feeling what I feel. And then there's kind of a lull, and then there's something else that would arise. And I think I had 6 or 7 of those through the time that I was experiencing the mushrooms in my body. And, death showed up a couple of times. The first time as kind of like an empty lampshade that had eye holes cut out of it. And so in my mind's eye, again, I'm just sitting in a chair the whole time. But I walked over to this kind of lamp-shaped sort of thing, but almost looked like a mask as well, because it had eye holes, and the back of it was open, and I picked it up and I put it on, and all I could see was emptiness, absolute emptiness. And I knew it was death and represented death, but it wasn't scary. It wasn't a scary emptiness. It was a vastness, just almost like a full emptiness, if that makes any sense. And it was fine. There was no fear around it at all. Death showed up a little bit later in the trip in a different way. But again, it was not scary then either. It was similar kind of okayness about it. And that was actually my overwhelming experience throughout the whole trip, is that I can handle this. Like I never at any point felt like I was in over my head, or that this is freaking me out, or this is too challenging, or even when it was extremely emotional and there was a lot of tears and sadness arising, I had to trust that that's what needs to happen. So I could go through all of the peaks if you want, but I don't know if that's where we want to go quite yet.
I feel like it really depends on what you feel is most relevant to share, to contextualize what comes next, which you have told me that you call the shadow winter. So what else of that experience do you think is relevant for us to know about you having gone through it, to contextualize what followed?
Okay, so to kind of focus in on a few of the highlights from that first experience, I would say that all my life I've been holding on to something, I guess to life, that, and when I had got my terminal diagnosis, it felt like, and this is also fits with the cultural paradigm, that cancer survivors like, keep fighting, hold on, don't let go, don't give up, rah, rah, and that had never really fit for me. I knew that's what I was kind of supposed to do, but it just wasn't something that fit for me as much as I tried. And so I could see very much that that's what I was trying to do. And at one point, I just let it go. And I remember my hands, like arms, like just flopped to my sides. And the relief that I felt was visceral. It was like I'd been holding something tight all my life, and I had finally suddenly just let it go. And I had a strong recognition that what I've thought of as my life is not my life. And we all think this is my life. Here I am living my life, and we call it my life. And in that moment when I let go of it, I realized that what I had been holding on to so tightly could now hold me. And that the relief that I felt as I sat back and just, I've never felt so much relief in my life as I did in that moment. And it was a blissful feeling, really and truly. Like, I don't have to be trying so hard. I don't have to, and so that was a huge moment of flipping something around that it has not flipped back, At times it starts to, and I'm like trying to control things again and thinking this is now I've got to control my death, and what's that going to look like? But, when I really remember back to it, and just even talking about it is helpful because it reminds me that life is holding me, that was a very important insight. And the other one that comes to mind, I mean, there were many, was this wedding ceremony that showed up during the first experience. So after I've surrendered and kind of let go of that grasping and holding on so tightly, there was a ceremony where I was getting married. And the night before, I'd had a dream. And I woke up in the morning and I told Daniel I had a dream about getting married, getting ready for a wedding. And he said, "Who were you marrying?" And I said, "I'm marrying myself." I was marrying myself in my dream the night before. And then in the mushroom trip at one of the peaks, I realized that I'm getting ready for a wedding, again. And which was reminiscent of the dream, except that in the mushroom experience, it went through the whole ceremony, which was me, and I was clasping my own hand as though it were my beloved's. And I was making a vow to myself never to hurt or harm myself in any way, ever. I could see all the times in my life when I had undermined my essence, when I had been too harsh on myself, when I had been mean to myself even, when I had even had thoughts that were unkind. And I could see each one, kind of like they were just snapping through. And I could see what a kind of a travesty that was. And that what we think of as kind of modesty or not taking credit for things or not stepping into our light or not being okay with our strengths in the world, like kind of minimizing them, playing them down, is actually not doing anybody any good. It's like, and I could see that. So I made this vow to myself that I would not do that anymore. And I, am certainly much more aware of it now when I do fall back into those old patterns. And that's what led to the kind of the winter of pulling apart the shadow, right? It was really because that was one of the things that really needed to be reminded again and again and again, that at any point when I'm being harsh with myself or down on myself or feeling like I should have this or I should be able to do this better, or whatever thought might arise and manifest as words or shared with my loved ones, that I really needed to remember that vow that I had made to myself during the mushroom experience, because loving ourselves is really what we're here to learn to do. That was very clear. And it's a hard thing for most of us to do, to really love ourselves completely, warts and all. It doesn't mean that you're perfect or you've got it all figured out, but you love yourself for who you are in that moment. Being a human, going through life, and messing things up sometimes and getting muddled and confused and despairing and joyful, like just the whole embracing the full catastrophe was what that wedding brought up, and I think every wedding maybe needs to have, a little bit like, yes, we love each other. And yes, yes, I love myself. And yes, I will stay with you throughout all of those times when you don't love yourself as much as you could, and I made that vow to myself. And that was one of the most helpful things that came out of the trip, was the recognition that loving myself is really important. Like, it's kind of crucial. Yeah.
And so that journey happened,
Yeah.
and life and dying continued on afterwards. And you entered
Mm-hmm.
into what you call the shadow winter, which was also literally winter. You're in Canada.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk about the shadow winter and how how the mushroom experience both sort of catalyzed and supported that winter, and what it did for you in your process of dying, and also your process of living, although with dying, living is a totally different thing. But what it did for you, and how it showed up, and how it eventually led to you deciding to step into a second journey.
Mm. Okay. So all the places where I didn't love myself surfaced, right? That was my shadow stuff, kind of bubbling to the surface. And there was anger in there, and frustration, and feeling of being just, can I handle all this? I mean, I know I asked for it. Luckily, my coach, or my guide, really walked alongside me, helping me integrate everything that had happened during the experience for like a month or two afterwards, because it took a while to really realize, like, have I shared all the gifts I wanted to with this world? That was one of the things that came up, a question that came up in the mushroom trip. And I realized that I had shared a lot, but maybe there were things that I had kind of shied away from. Like, even this interview actually would be something that a couple of years ago, I think, there's no way I would do that. But now there's other things that are more important than whatever reluctance I might have to share something so vulnerable and intimate with a larger group than just close friends. So any places where I hadn't been able to really love myself for who I am surfaced that winter. And it was messy. I won't pretend it was smooth or easy. And I was very articulate about it. Like, I talked to close friends and family about, this is what's going on for me. This is what I need to be doing right now. And please help me through this, be patient with me and help me flesh out what it is that is arising right now. Like, what is this shadow that I need to look at? So that was helpful, to be surrounded by people, including my guide, like not in personally, but just, checking in every so often around, how are you managing everything that's arising from, because the mushroom experience was like a catalyst, right? It was like it was like an alchemical solution, it's like that's changing something very integral inside of me into something else. And it felt like into what was always there. So it was, those layers were starting to fall away. And then what propelled me into the second trip was, I got stuck in some anger that was arising, and I am not skillful with anger, and even with the help of everyone around me, I was having a tough time. And I thought, okay, maybe the mushrooms can teach me something about, because under the anger was a profound grief and an abandonment of myself that is part of my own personal history, as a child. So it was really old pain. And I've been in therapy a lot during my adult life, like a lot. And I've dealt with these issues. But there was something there that I just could not quite let go of, or it was about forgiveness. It was about needing to maybe grieve for that lost part of myself and maybe part of my lost childhood. I really didn't know what it was, honestly, when I went into the second trip. I couldn't have articulated, and I did have trouble kind of explaining it to myself and others, like, what's propelling this? I'm not exactly sure. But again, I was asking a similar question, like, let's let whatever, like, here I am a year later, so I've lived another year, so I'm presumably another year closer to death. Let's let whatever is inessential show up and fall away. And basically the mushrooms were saying to me, yeah, you've pretty much done that. There wasn't like that shadow winter after the first experience and going through all of those different feelings that had come up about, my need to be needed, or like all the shadows. Like I just saw the other side of everything, that even good traits, like being a helpful person to my family and friends, I could see that there was a shadow side to that. That was like, oh, what would happen if you weren't someone that was able to help people? Which is what's going to happen as I get closer to death. I'm going to be the one getting 100% of the help at some point. So, what's that like, to let that fall away as a mother, as a sister, as a friend, as a wife? How do I really and truly step into letting other people completely care for me more and more and more as time goes on? And so I had been chipping away at it. And then when the second experience came along, it said, yeah, you're doing a good job of chipping away at that. Like, you got this, you got that, you kind of. And I'm like, oh, well, then maybe I didn't need to do another experience. But what the second experience did was it didn't have the same, 6 or 7 peaks with different little aspects to each one. It was one big dive and one big peak. And it was, I remember crying, like everyone I loved had died. And that's kind of what dying is like. It's like everyone I love will die to me, right? Like I'm going to have to say goodbye to everyone I love. And they all have to say goodbye to me. And I cried from a place that I don't know if I've ever cried from before. It was complete pitch blackness, like being on the bottom of the ocean floor. It's like at night and you're 100 feet down and it's just so black and so dark and so despairing. And like I was crying from the very, very depths of my being. And I've never cried like that before or since. And it was like I was saying goodbye to my whole life and everyone I love. And the pain was almost unbearable. It was almost too much to bear. But at the same time, it was really a kind of a beautiful thing because I love a whole lot of people, right? And I was aware of that in this bleakness, like that it wouldn't be so difficult to die if I didn't love my life so much, or something like that. So I was grieving the depths of grieving, and then, just as though it was the bottom of the ocean, there was this tiny little light appeared, like a little bubble that was glowing from within, and it's coming out of that primordial muck on the bottom of the ocean, let's say, and this is all in my mind's eye, like I'm not seeing it, I'm just envisioning it. And because I've been an artist all my life, it's not a stretch for me to think about metaphors and, all of that sort of thing. But this little bubble kind of starts to kind of bubble up. And just like it would if it was coming up from the bottom of the ocean, it starts to make its way up to the surface and to the light, And I followed it up and up and up and up. And then my deep despair turned into this incredible joy and laughter. And it was like, when you cry really, really hard and then you can almost sound like you're laughing, or sometimes you do actually start laughing, or you laugh so hard that it takes you into weeping. And, that can happen. So laughter and tears, we know they're connected. But here, the darkness, the light, the joy, I was howling with laughter. And when I think back on it, I don't think the sound of the crying really changed that much. It just almost seamlessly went from deep weeping and moaning and like very loud verbal expression of deep grief into a loud verbal expression of deep joy, and just laughing and howling with laughter, and just side splitting, like kind of slapping my knee, kind of, because I could barely breathe. I was laughing so hard, and in that moment, I realized that despair and joy are not separate. That life and death not separate. This is very clear recognition that you don't get one without the other. They go together. They can't be. We can't just pick some things that we like and just let the things that we don't like, disregard them, So that deep despair and that laughter and joy that I felt were like this. They were just this. And it was so clear to me. And that has been very helpful recently because I have never been so in love with life as I am right now. Because it's winding down. And also, I've never been so easily moved to tears by, the look on, my husband's face or my son's face, or the smell of the lilacs or the clouds in the sky. I feel like I just want to gather it all up in my arms and love every second of it, even the hard part, and especially the hard part, and that they're not separate, right? It's not an either or game. It's, it's like I feel like I'm all in for life now, like all in completely as it winds down, as it moves towards ending.
So, I'm actually just kind of like in an awe moment, so I might need a second. I might even cut this bit out.
Do I want a preamble for the poem or just go right into it? I might talk about the brain cancer showing up with the eyes being different sizes or something?
Yeah, kind of give the context for it, and then afterwards you can explain sort of like where it lands in the context of your dying time now, and then how it sort of relates to what was learned from the psilocybin experience.
Okay, great. So this is a poem that showed up a few weeks ago, and it was a direct result of an eye condition called anisocoria, where one pupil is larger than the other. And this is what precipitated a brain MRI, which showed that the cancer in my brain, or there was cancer in my brain, which I didn't know about. I thought the cancer was in my lungs and my bones. So this was a response to that. And the poem is called Anisocoria. It's inspired by a line from another poem called Learning from Trees. And the line goes like this: and we will learn about the fine dark emptiness, both knowing it and not knowing it. It's written by Grace Butcher. And so here's the poem that I wrote in response to that. If you, like me, pronounced it as in Little Orphan Annie, we are both forgiven. It is not a word we want to learn. Looking in the mirror, I see one pupil larger than the other, to let in more light, also the darkest part of me. In there, an expanding depth that I carry everywhere, every day, both knowing it and not knowing it. How could it be otherwise? The larger pupil is a good student, keen and opening. The other shrinking down behind her desk, nothing to see here. Don't pick me. The eager one knows that it is from that fine dark emptiness that we come, and into the same we will return. I find this expanding vision an invitation to know it, to find a way through it. Getting to know it means something, perhaps even darker still. The good student knows now how to pronounce it. An anisocoria, an eye, so at the core of me, looking, opening inward, wider still, letting in all this light. So this was a surprise to have a poem show up in the middle of the night one day, and I just had to get out of bed and write it down. I thought I'm not a poet, and there was all this, who am I to be writing poems all of a sudden kind of showing up. Mm-hmm. But as we know, that I don't really have a lot of time to spend worrying about whether I'm a poet or not. I just decided to put it out in the world. And thank you for asking me to read it. It feels like it describes exactly where I'm at right now, which is, doing the mushroom trip was like diving headfirst into the deep end for me. It was scary, and I didn't know what was going to show up, but it held me. It caught me and it held me, and it helped me through this time. Like the good student, like putting up her hand, like I could do a mushroom trip. I could do a mushroom trip. Or, I can learn as much as I can about dying, and I'm going to die really, really well, whatever that means. But I hadn't been paying as much attention to the other student, who's hiding under her desk. Nothing to see here, pick someone else. And I felt writing this poem brought her into my heart, that part of me that doesn't want to die, that isn't ready to go. And I have been trying to be such a good student that I had been neglecting the part of me that just wants to keep on living. And so, with the knowledge that I've got now about what it means to really love myself, what it means to really love life, which the mushrooms help to illuminate. Or that, it wasn't like that wasn't there before, but they really made it clear that that's what's important. I feel like whatever time I have left is going to be acknowledging both sides, Yes, I will be as present for my death as I can. But first, I'm going to be as present for my life as I can, and then realizing that those two things are not different, really. There's a wholeness, there's a coming full circle feeling to this time. And a friend said recently that this is a sacred time, and I agree with her. I think that it is a sacred time to be present for my life and my death in the coming months, with a wholehearted curiosity and commitment to not get caught up in anything that takes me away from that, and that's a daily practice, of what's happening today. Where's energy going today? How's it going to be used? And I'm grateful for this opportunity to share this experience with you, because I feel like this is important. And there's a stigma around using psychedelics, at least in my age group, and probably in the wider world as well. And it's something that I would like to see break down, because, as I've said, this was incredibly helpful. And I wish it was more accessible, or more easily accessible for people. And my vision for 50 years from now, when there'll be, this capacity on a palliative team, I don't know if that will come to pass, but that would be what I would want to work for if I was going to live longer and had energy to spend that way. So I have a deep respect for this plant medicine, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity that it came into my life, and what it taught me, and what it continues to teach me.
Andrea, thank you very much for sharing here today and opening up into such vulnerable places for us. One of the reasons why I felt really called to have you on the show, because generally I don't have people on the show to talk about their experience with psychedelics, because I just don't really generally see trip reports as very valuable. However, it seemed like what you learned and the art, I don't know, like the beautiful artistic way that you have learned, and the way that you're able to really share deeply what you went into and what came out of it for you feels, for me, has felt deeply, deeply valuable to hear and to learn from you what you learned in your experience, not just with the mushrooms, but are ongoingly learning in your dying time. And that was why it wasn't really a question for me at the core of me, which was like, does this fit on the show? It's like, absolutely, this fits on the show. Absolutely. I'm again, like, excited, complicated excitement about it. And now being on the other side of having done this interview, I feel a part of me is like, sweet, you knew it. She nailed it. Nice. So, yeah.
Thanks, James.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea.
I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you and with your listeners. And
this is the time in the interview where normally it's like, so how can people follow more of what you do and your work and all the rest? And I'm not sure how particularly relevant that might feel to you right now, but this is a space, if there's places you want to send people to see so your artwork or the other things that you've produced over the years. You're a beautiful artist. Now is sort of the opportunity to give those people directions, website links, and all the rest of that.
Well, I do have a website, which, it doesn't have any art on it after I was diagnosed with cancer. It kind of stalled out around 2013. But there is a lot of art on there at AndreaBird.com. There's also interviews on that website that I've done. And I've started to recite poetry on Facebook, which I make public because I feel like sharing my dying time in that way with the poems that have been helping me get through this time. So if anyone was interested in watching those, that would be fine. That's about it for now. There's a documentary that's coming, I don't know when exactly, about how we die, a 6-part documentary, and I believe I'll be interviewed for that. So, but maybe all of those links will probably end up on my website.
Awesome. And your website URL again is?
AndreaBird.com.
Great. Andrea, thank you again very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, James.
And cut. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Again, please go check out Andrea's work at AndreaBird.com. She has some beautiful art up there. And if you've never seen Encaustic, it is very cool, especially up close and in person. So yeah, go check out AndreaBird.com. If you feel this episode had some value, please consider sharing it on your social media feed or with people who you feel that it will be meaningful for them to hear it. The show is pretty small. It's word of mouth mostly, so please share it. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by heading to jameswjesso.com/support, where there are options to become a patron, leave a PayPal donation, or buy something from the shop. And all those differing links of where you can support are in the episode description, wherever you're checking it out, be it YouTube or iTunes or whatever. So that's all for this episode. So thank you for tuning in all the way to the end. I got a little announcement for you, which is that you've probably seen the episodes are coming out once a week rather than every 2 weeks. This has been intentional. I've had some episodes that have been recorded that feel really time-sensitive, relevant, put it out in the world. And so they've been coming out week to week. I'm also going to take a relatively short break to focus on a writing project after this next episode. That's sort of an explanation as to why they've been coming out so quick. I want to get some content for you to hang on and chew on and whatever before I take my little break. So thanks very much for tuning in again all the way to the end, and I will see you on the next episode of Adventures Through the Mind.